Namaste, everyone. In May 2016, hundreds of Syrian refugees fleeing the atrocities of a 6-year-old civil war and ISIS arrived in Canada, lucky enough to get a second chance at life. In painful contrast, more than 100 migrants died this May trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea to reach Europe, paying the ultimate price for asylum and a better future. In May 1845, 171 years ago, some 220 of our East Indian ancestors arrived on Nelson Island. They came as indentured workers for the sugar industry, which was facing a labor crisis with the end of slavery. They had ended their 3-month perilous journey across the treacherous waters known as the Kalapani, or what we call the Atlantic Ocean. 6 did not survive this first crossing. Whether they felt the same joy as the Syrian refugees arriving in Canada, we will never know. What we do know is our ancestors' very first act upon arrival was to seek the blessings of Dharti Mata, Mother Earth, by touching the soil of Nelson Island. We are celebrating Indian Arrival Day 2016 against the backdrop of the largest humanitarian crisis the world has seen since the end of World War II. I look at the thousands of Syrian refugees willing to put their babies and few precious belongings on an old fishing boat to cross the Mediterranean Sea, which has acquired new fame as the world's deadliest sea crossing. When the flimsy, overcrowded boats capsize, the refugees' dreams of a better life sink to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. No longer a path to a better life, but a watery grave. For our East Indian ancestors, crossing the Kalapani must have been traumatic as well. I could only imagine. I imagine the fear they must have felt in their hearts, the sorrow of leaving India. Our ancestors leaving their villages in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, with dirt roads, farms with cows, their kutias, homes made with cow dung. Their simple lives left behind. Our ancestors were not fleeing conflict. We can only guess what motivated them to leave India, the promise of money, a land of sugar, or, as it was called, Trinidad. They faced 3 never-ending months of seeing just water into the horizon. The memories of those villages and the faces of those they would have never seen again would have been their only source of comfort. Conditions on board the ships were overcrowded, and there were frequent outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and measles. Some did not survive the long and brutal Middle Passage journey, and their bodies were unceremoniously thrown overboard. Like the Syrian refugees, they continued into this unknown. The story of all migrants has common threads: tragedy, loss, alienation, hope, perseverance, and success. This morning, I will look at the East Indian story of May 2016 as seen through my eyes. My version, like the story of migrants, speaks of tragedy, love, loss, alienation, hope, perseverance, and success. I remember the nearly 145,000 men and women who came during the 70-odd years of indentureship to work on the sugarcane plantations in Trinidad. We have benefited from their strength, faith, and courage. Their bravery has made this country and made us as a people. Remember them, their hardships, their humiliation in the cane fields, barefoot from dawn to dusk. Remember they labored tirelessly, ate little, and saved their money to benefit their children. Remember, discipline was enforced on them with an iron hand, and the wick cracked generously. Remember, any breach of their indentureship contract meant punishment by criminal prosecution or a jail sentence for what were really civil offenses. Remember the attempts to strip them of their identity and to convert them to Christianity. Remember the unwillingness to accept their cultural traditions. Remember, Hindu and Muslim marriages were not recognized by the state until 1946, some 100 years after the first indentured laborer arrived in Trinidad. Most of our grandparents and some of our parents were considered illegitimate. When you drive past those abandoned, idle, hundreds of acres of sugarcane fields, remember, you are a child of India and of sugar. Whether you are a doctor, lawyer, teacher, prime minister, or even central bank governor. Remember them. This is partly what Indian Arrival Day means. But to me, Indian Arrival Day means much more. I am the living legacy of these men and women. You are the living legacy, a testament to their sacrifice, and each one of the 450,000 East Indian descendants in Trinidad and Tobago today is a living legacy of these brave Gurmitias whose sacrifices should not go in vain. The question we must ask ourselves, 171 years later, is, are we honoring the sacrifices of our ancestors with the lives we have made here in Trinidad and Tobago? I am proud to say we've done exceptionally well in our new home. Perseverance has brought us here. From the sugarcane fields, the children and grandchildren of the indentures have distinguished themselves as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Indo-Trinidadians now account for 35% of the Trinidad and Tobago population. We are the single largest ethnic group in the country. We have produced some of the best artists, writers, religious leaders, political thinkers, doctors, lawyers, scientists, and sportsmen. We have produced a president, 2 prime ministers, a chief justice, and 2 central bank governors. We have achieved so much, despite the challenges we face. But as they say, there's always room for improvement. Like the Syrian refugees facing discrimination and isolation in Europe, we have faced sustained discrimination in our new home. From old British laws that did not recognize Hindu and Muslim marriages to hiring practices in the public service. This is all well known. Our national anthem claims every creed and race finds an equal place. However, in reality, beneath a veneer of tolerance, there simmers feelings of resentment and frustration. The refusal to grant the Mahasabha a radio license, the hounding out of office of Chief Justice Sat Sharma, my illegal and unconstitutional removal as governor of the central bank, the refusal to open the Cuba Children's Hospital, despite a feasibility study the man in PNM had that clearly made the case for building a hospital in central Trinidad. Here, every creed and race finds an equal place. Not so all the time. As the hiring practices of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for 49 and a half years would show the contrary. Not so too for the University of the West Indies St. Augustine South Campus in Pinal Debe, because somehow being located south of the Carney Bridge is equal by one current PNM minister as not benefiting all. The minister who believes the South Campus is not beneficial to all citizens should consider refunding the tens of millions of dollars in rent students from south of the Carney Bridge have paid over the years to be educated in St. Augustine. The best way to fight discrimination is through perseverance. As educators, I call on you, the Samaj community, to demand the Rowley PNM government open the Debe South campus. As citizens, we must demand the Debe campus does not turn into another tragedy that was the Beach High School. Tell them education trumps politics. Can you do that? Despite the challenges, we have been prosperous. However, we are at a time in our country's story where we must ask ourselves, how is the Indo-Trinidadian community defined today in this country? This is the part where my much publicized bravado sometimes comes out, and according to the PNM, gets me into trouble. However, my bravado to talk about the Indian community might be of little interest to those in the PNM who have already seen Indians and have always seen Indians as a recalcitrant minority and treated us as such. How are we, the Indian community, defined today in this country? I believe we are seen as weak. We are seen as passive. We are seen as corrupt, tainted by the murky lens of politics. We are seen as unfit to govern this country. We are seen as rum till I die. East Indians have been defined by ignorant stereotypes. Defined is an understatement when attempts are made to portray our two East Indian prime ministers as always existing in a state of inebriation, and after each Indian-led government leaves office, witch hunts commence to unearth the corruption, as it is assumed we must have done things corruptly. Admittedly, some of this reputation is self-inflicted. The Hindu Credit Union was an attempt to harness the Indian community and Indian economic power, and if done right, would have transformed the Indo-Trinidadian community. Unfortunately, HCU was a colossal failure. The only thing Hindu about Hindu Credit Union was its name. None of its big business practices were consistent with Dharma or righteous duty. Indo-Trinidadians are seen as a community driven by making money, educating their children, and the majority seem unconcerned about the country they live in. So much so they fall silent and turn their backs when things get difficult, as they are too weak and passive to do what it takes to fight to make things better. If we look around today, right here, we have not felt the presence of the Arya Samaj in the society. We have felt the presence of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha, Astra, and the Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, and Anglican churches. The contribution of the Arya Samaj has mainly been confined to education. Why end there? We seem to be afraid to communicate our views and solutions on the social ills that confront us in our homeland, Trinidad and Tobago. We have reduced our role to doing Hawan, celebrating Diwali, and the hosting of 2 Utsavs each year. We are afraid of engaging in actions that validate the existence of our organization. We are now guilty of ritualism, the very same complaint we've made against Orthodox Hindus. Each day, we are confronted with common social ills: indiscipline in schools, breakdown of families, conversion of Hindus, violence against women, children, and the elderly, alcoholism, weak leadership, endemic corruption, and yet the Samaj is quiet. Would Swami Dayanand have remained quiet? This is a far cry from our core religious beliefs. Swami Dayanand was not the founder of a new religion. He was the advocate for a return to the universal principles espoused in the Vedas for the creation of a noble society, as he believed Hinduism was driven by social ills, Brahmanism, the hoarding and misinterpretation of knowledge by the priestly class, discrimination against women and children through child labor and child marriages, lack of educational opportunities, practices rooted in superstition, such as the caste system, which is no longer relevant to Desh, Kal, and Patra, place, time, and circumstances. The Arya Samaj is first and foremost an organization for social reform. If we are truly to be Samajas, we should start acting rather than talking. Staying true to who you are is never easy. Samajas must remember who they are. Others have also forgotten who they are. However, unlike Samajas, they have forgotten who they are on purpose. Since the September 7th elections, many in our Indian community have ingratiated themselves with the PNM. Overnight, they've moved from being fierce opponents of the institutionalized discrimination perpetrated upon us by the PNM, some the very victims of that discrimination, to kissing PNM rings and lying in the shade of the Balize bush. Survival, perhaps, to each his own. I ask myself, would some of our Indian leaders of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s have taken this treacherous route for their own survival? These leaders teamed up with each other in the cane fields, intellectually, politically, as they were willing to fight the hard fight for the Indian community. One man emerged as a titan in the Indo-Trinidadian community, Badis Sagan Maraj. He was a trade unionist, religious leader, parliamentarian, businessman, and philanthropist. No one has done more to free the children of the indentures and the generation that followed from illiteracy. Buddhists built 6 Hindu primary schools in 1 year in 1952, and another 6 schools the following year, a feat that has not been matched up to this day. Today, we are faced with fragments of that Indian spirit. We depend on and now expect the government to give us everything: schools, education, healthcare. The fight to build our own is no longer there. We even depend on government to pay for celebrations of our own Indian festivals. How did this shameful begging start? I don't know. But each year, the cries of, "We didn't get enough for Diwali," or "We didn't get enough for Indian Arrival Day," are heard. And sometimes it does not matter which government is in power. We are living in the age of entitlement, a different age from that of Buddhists, and we need to understand no government owes us anything. We must fight equally hard for the things we want. 80 years ago, Ramlila was staged across our country as they are now. Diwali celebrations took place all without government funding. We have progressed materially as a people, yet we have regressed in other areas, as the values of our ancestors have lost meaning and are now diluted. Politically, Buddhists freed the Indian community from political dormancy. As leader of the Democratic Labour Party, Buddhists became the first Indian politician to successfully defeat the PNM in the federal elections of 1958, an accomplishment that would not be repeated until 37 years later, when Basdev Pandey led the UNC to victory in the 1995 general elections. Buddhists sought to prevent exploitations of Indians in the sugar industry. He was the President General of the All Trinidad Sugar and General Workers Trade Union. He was a shrewd businessman. By the time Buddhist was 30 years, he was already a millionaire. Yet, the late Buddhist Sagan Maharaj remains an unsung, unappreciated, and unknown nation builder. To be fair, Buddhist attracted his share of controversy for the various roles he played in politics, trade unionism, religion, education, business, and in his personal life. Yet, he was respected, admired, and feared. How have we moved from building schools and fighting the establishment of the day to being considered corrupt and irrelevant in our own country? As an economist, I have my theory on the reason behind the diminished status we have in our own country. I think Indo-Trinidadian businessmen have missed an opportunity to unite forces on this small island. Anthony Sabga, the founder of the country's largest conglomerate, has said in his autobiography, "Sabga, a will and a way," and I quote, "It," meaning independence, "made me aware that to succeed, I would have to create coalitions and bring people together who would not otherwise unite." He further said, "The help I received from the many people in my life had shown me that the way to succeed was through collaboration. Individual will is important, but unless the individual can harness and unify a varied group, especially in a place like Trinidad, there were not many other ways to break through the walls of colonial society." I've always looked for partnerships, and whatever I did with my partners was through dialogue and consensus. End of quote. The Indo-Trinidadian community has considerable economic power. However, that power is dispersed across several families, industries, professions, and religions. We all know the iconic family names, such as Bhagwan Singhs, Ramutar Singhs, Junior Sami, Kusals, C. Ram Brothers, D. Ram Prasad, S. M. Jalil, and Ken Charles of solo fame. Indians have established more businesses in more spheres than any other ethnic group in this country, yet they are not united. While Anthony Sabga overcame that great impediment to success, known as crab in a barrel syndrome, I'm afraid, based on my personal observations, the Indo-Trinidadian community is fragmented. This means we miss a real opportunity to find ways to help each other, whether it is to fund those very same traditional cultural celebrations, whether it is to build a new school, or whether it is to even enter into new business ventures. I said the story of migrants often has hope built in, and as my version of the East Indian in Trinidad today continues, I return to the now abandoned sugarcane fields that were once the heart of the Indian community here. The brutal closure of Carney 1975 Limited by the Manin PNM administration, ironically, on August 1st, 2003, Emancipation Day, had a devastating impact on the Indian community. The $175 million in foreign exchange earned every year by Carney had brought dignity to more than 6,000 cane farmers and 3,000 cane cutters, whose livelihoods were callously stripped away. Communities and families were suddenly disrupted. People have died. Cane farmers sold off their lands to pay debts. Businesses created around the sugar industry went bankrupt. Over 75,000 acres of prime agricultural land, or more than 5% of this country's entire land area, were abandoned. Here in these fields, the story of hope, perseverance, and success can grow again at a time when economically we need it. In no part of the world would any government be allowed to put 9,000 workers and their families on the breadline without a long and bruising struggle. Remember, I said the Indian community is seen as weak and submissive. The PNM government was able to close down Carney because they knew Indians would never rise up and riot to protect their livelihood. Cane is sweet. However, the plight of Carney cane farmers is very bitter and a black mark in Trinidad's history. Many reasons were put forward for shutting down Carney. One main reason was that Carney was heavily subsidized to the tune of $200 million a year. It was racking up considerable losses and had built up significant debt. By that financial yardstick, we should have already shut down WASA and TNTEC, both of which are not only unprofitable, but also insolvent. By 2002, WASA's accumulated operating deficit was almost $6 billion. And at the end of 2001, TNTEC's accumulated operating deficit was close to $1 billion. One wonders why the PNM government decided to close down BWIA, which was also a heavily subsidized and loss-making airline, only to rehire the same workers to run Caribbean Airlines after paying them millions in severance. Here, every creed and race finds an equal place, or some are more equal than others. Another reason put forward for Carney's closure was that Trinidad and Tobago had become increasingly dependent on access to the subsidized preferential markets of Europe and the United States, where sugar was sold well above international market prices. Both Europe and the United States were phasing out preferential sugar arrangements. How then can we explain why 4 Caribbean countries, Jamaica, Guyana, Belize, and Barbados, are still engaged in sugar production a decade after the end of the preferential sugar trading regime? In fact, sugar is still the largest foreign exchange earner in Jamaica's agricultural sector, generating more than $100 million a year. It directly employs more than 35,000 farmers. The Jamaican government has even sold 3 of its sugar estates to the Chinese. They did not close it down. In Guyana, the sugar industry is the 3rd largest contributor to foreign exchange, and the government owns 8 cane estates and 7 sugar factories. In my view, Carney's tipping point was about political survival, not about economics. The Manning PNM government feared another general election could either bring about a repeat of the 1818 general election deadlock as in 2001, or even worse, a clear win by the UNC as in 1995 and in 2000. So, abruptly closing down Carney would deliver a mortal blow and lick up the UNC with its base in the sugar industry. Or put another way, why not bankrupt the base of your political opponents by redistributing the votes? The Carney lands in central Trinidad have been the first to be quickly developed into housing. This has meant at least 2 UNC strongholds have moved closer and closer to becoming marginal constituencies. It is regrettable the People's Partnership Administration, with its roots in the cane farming community, did not see it fit to reintroduce sugar on a commercially viable basis following the tragic closure of Carney, which decimated these very communities. For 13 years, Carney cane farmers have endured old talk about their future prospects, which have become dimmer and more distant, even though there is great potential on the local market for sugar and its products. Trinis clearly have a sweet tooth. We spend over $425 million a year on importing sugar, molasses, and honey. In fact, we import around 70,000 tons of sugar, mainly from Guyana. Around 40,000 tons is used directly by us as consumers, and the other 30,000 tons is used by the manufacturers of soft drinks, confectionery, pastries, and cakes. Manning's closure of Carney now means we pay more for a raw material we use great quantities of, and it is another drain on our precious foreign exchange reserves. Clearly, a myopic move. Local production of sugar for local demand would save millions in foreign exchange. The new business model for sugar would be one based on an agricultural cooperative, where the cane farmers are the owners of the sugarcane estates and sugar factory, not the government. Numerous success stories around the world show the power of agricultural cooperatives to help small farmers secure land rights, obtain better prices on agricultural inputs, market their goods, create jobs, and participate in profit sharing. In India, the cooperatives control half of sugar production. A sugar cooperative would give our cane farmers a better chance at competing with Guyana's sugarcane farms, which through CARICOM have access to our markets. We have one local investment banker turned entrepreneur who has already established a small sugar mill plant at the Inverness estate near Princestown. He has seen the commercial benefit of producing sugar for local consumption, as well as making jaggery or guru, a product noted for its amazing therapeutic and health benefits and a base for many Ayurvedic medicines. He also plans to butter sugarcane juice and to manufacture animal feed from the bagasse available after extracting the sugarcane juice. The sugarcane industry, for us, is associated with memories of our ancestors working the land. However, revival of the sugarcane industry is more than a sentimental wish about rediscovering a part of our heritage. It is more than a legacy to pass on to our children, many of whom, and I see them here in this audience, have little or no memories of growing the best type of sugarcane, of burning the cane, of cutting and loading the cane onto tractor trailers, and the smell of the cane when crushed in the mill. Reviving the sugarcane industry, more importantly, is about economics and about saving precious foreign exchange. The best two governments have done is to build houses on prime agricultural lands. And while these houses are important and needed to create communities, at a time when the government would sell any asset it can lay its hands on, Carney's agricultural land is a gold mine for earning precious foreign exchange. I believe there are many creative ways the titans of the Indo-Trinidadian business community can contribute to nation building. One way would be to come together and finance new avenues to earn foreign exchange. This would benefit their respective businesses and the country at large. There are opportunities. 171 years on this island, and the Indo-Trinidadian community has a lot to show. But we can also do much more to cement our place here and strengthen our economic position. We need to stop counting our achievements by how much money we make, and how many scholarships we win, and how many top SEA places we get. Our ancestors have given us more than a new home in Trinidad. They gave us a foundation to help us build a great country. As Canada welcomes more refugees and they find their new home there, we will watch them use their tragic past to drive them to do better. They will turn loss into success. So it is our duty to honor our ancestors' struggles and sacrifices. Let us resolve this Indian Arrival Day to not accept the discrimination we face and to find ways, like Bade Sagan Maharaj, to open doors for our fellow Indians. Let us have the foresight to put aside our ego, overcome the crab and barrel mentality, and work together in the only land we know as home. I thank you.